Under the name Work of God, for almost a century, one organization operating under the Catholic Church makes its members believe they are achieving holiness through ordinary work. But once you scratch the surface, there is a much darker side to their practices. This is the secret world of Opus Dei. Crunch time, it's crunch time, it's crunch time. This is my preparation level for the episode. It is 6 o'clock, everybody. 6 o'clock on the dot. I've shut my work laptop. My manager was like, you can finish for a day. I was like, you don't dismiss me, I dismiss myself. What is this teacher logic? No, I have already dismissed myself. I have shut the laptop a couple of minutes before 6. They don't care about that. Detective unit, why were you whispering? Were you whispering? Detective unit, record scratch and all that. I have gathered us all here today in order to talk about the most upvoted topic. You know how you do polls on YouTube? That is what I mean, not like Reddit upvoted topic. Rather the upvoted topic that I have chosen for myself. I have asked through a poll whether people want to know about Opus Dei, because I knew nothing. And when I say nothing, I mean like I had to Google what lay people were, okay? That is my knowledge on Catholic Church. Now, that might have already made you click out of this video, in which case, goodbye. But if you're here for a ride, this is yet another typical deep dive into the topic that you wanted to actually hear about. Other topics that are people's priority, or like rather, they have been most upvoted on my end, whether through forums or comments, were the cases of Elisa Lam and Chris Watts. So let me know if you want me to go into those. You guys keep asking for those cases, and those have just been covered by hundreds and hundreds of people. So I want to cover the cases that really aren't, that don't have that sort of recognition, that don't have that sort of coverage. I edited the most disgusting burp out there, but let me know if you want those, or rather, if you want me to cover another case that maybe hasn't gotten that much coverage in the supernatural realm. And then something that I do want to cover is a case of a family annihilator. However, I don't really want to talk about Chris Watt. It's just like so many theories out there, and this case is controversial enough, okay? So let us just dive in, start here, and then if you still want me to continue covering a lot of other controversial cases, you tell me. The comment sections on those are wild, and like I need a moderator just when it comes to like those most popular cases. Speaking of moderation, just in general, my main goal with this case is basically to offer people a different side of Opus Dei. So even if you do know about the organization, even if you do know about it from the Catholic Church side, from just your religion, your faith, you might not know about the darker side of it. So as much as I try to offer unbiased opinion in these videos, this is a true crime channel after all, so basically about 70% of this video will focus on the darker side of their practices. And that brings us to the trigger warning of the day. This will be one of those videos where I will put a timestamp on the screen once I talk about something that is called self-mortification, which in my opinion is just the way that we glamorized the word, rather the expression, self-harm. So if this isn't something that you want to listen to, as I mentioned, I have structured this in such a way where I will only be talking about this for a portion of the video, and in that case you will be given the option, basically the timestamp on the screen, where you can just skip through that part so that you don't know really all of the details, because it makes this topic one of the most morbid topics in my opinion. And on that note, this case is, as I mentioned, very controversial. You will have different opinions in the comment section. Something that I would personally like to see, just like when I covered the Elan School, is people's either real-life experiences or stories from others. Now, with what I just mentioned, with the trigger warning, that of course might not be the option for so many people, and if it's not, look after yourselves, don't even listen to this video. There's plenty of other topics on my channel, and also, of course, no obligation to share anything. It's just that I would actually like to know more the positive stories, because as I mentioned, this video, even though not completely biased, will be focusing mostly on the secret world, on the part that not many people are really aware of. So if anybody really has a positive experience and can contradict on basically everything that I will be stating during this video, those are mostly the comments that I would actually like to see. And then all of the other people, please be respectful of other people's experiences. Okay, just no gaslighting. That is my level of moderation until I get actual moderators on this freaking channel. And in that light, do like and share and subscribe, and mostly share this to expose me with more people if you want more deep dives like this. But now, because this video is already too long and the introduction really doesn't need any more information, any more pieces of advice, let us start this topic off with the basics, with its history, with the background, with who the founder of it was, and how he even came up with an idea to found an organization like this. I would recommend, and I will put in the description box, the link to a documentary that is on YouTube. It kind of is more biased towards like the positive side, but it has some really interesting interviews. I know there's like other documentaries made on this, and of course there's the Da Vinci Code that everybody has quoted here, and I will not really give it too much time of day because A, didn't watch it, B, I think the Da Vinci Code focuses on a lot of other issues and not so prevalently on the Opus Dei, so I will just touch upon that topic. But where I'm going with this is I would recommend watching the one that I did, and I will be playing some videos, should copyright allow it, from that in order to kind of paint a picture, especially of the founder of this organization, because just like with many organizations of this sort, whether it is Catholic Church, whether it is the figures that you see in the media sort of representing such organizations, or just whether it is cults, whether you believe in the fact that these organizations sometimes can show cult-like behavior. Its founder is extremely charismatic, which kind of makes sense once you actually learn about the organization, how it was founded, and then where it went to and why it still exists today. So, Opus Dei was founded by Jose Maria Escriva in Spain in year 1928. The message and the general idea that it was founded because was to get lay people, meaning the non-ordained members of the church. From what I gather, that just means that these are not like preachers, nuns, popes, but rather just regular churchgoers, into serving God and following Christ with the help of a series of guidelines that, of course, Opus Dei is going to establish for them. Their motto, their agenda, whatever you want to call it, that you will see on plenty of sites, is that holiness could be found not in a monastery or in a church, but through the performance of your ordinary work. Now you might wonder, how did Jose Maria come up with one such idea? How does something like this even get into his mind? And according to the story, his autobiographers, he was just praying in his room. He was the son of a shopkeeper, he was just living in this convent in Madrid, and he was just doing his daily prayer. And as the bells of this church were ringing, he just got enlightened. As his autobiographers would say, he saw Opus Dei as the Lord wished it, and how it would be in the course of the centuries.
Spain, a European country of some 42 million people, 94% of whom are Catholic. In 1902, Jose Maria Escrivá de Balaguer was born into a devout Catholic family. As a pious teenager, Escrivá entered the seminary, and at the age of 23, Jose Maria was ordained a priest.
He was a person with a tremendous faith able to do whatever thing to accomplish or to follow that faith.
The turning point in Escrivá's life came on October 2nd, 1928. During a retreat in Madrid, he heard the ringing of church bells and experienced a vision. He believed it was a supernatural intervention from God. This vision would become Opus Dei. I love Opus Dei with all my heart, as it is an instrument to serve the church, to serve souls, to contribute to peace and happiness of all people, the well-being of the world.
he would found Opus Dei and would convert this organization into one that would contribute to the peace of the world. The organization is still fully recognized to this day, and it is the approved arm of the Catholic Church. As you can see just from the videos I'm overlaying, Opus Dei as the organization isn't short of members. As of 2018, they had over 95,000 members. This includes about 93,000 of lay people and only about 2,000 priests. And the mission from the beginning was for Opus Dei to become a personal prelature of the Catholic Church. And as such, it is to help just ordinary people seek holiness in their work and ordinary activities.
The message from our founder and the message from the Opus Dei is always the same. Everybody can be a saint, must be a saint, but sanctifying the everyday life.
For this to work, for you to be going into your job wherever it is, commuting every day, bringing that kind of level and connection with God into your everyday life, sort of outside the premises of the church only, this organization had to expand, and the Escriva did just that. For you to understand how and on the back of what Escriva even managed to do this to this degree, where there's so many people still enrolled in some sort of membership with Opus Dei, we kind of have to have a history refresher. Because, if you remember, he founded it in 1928. Now, he did it in Spain, and in 1939, Spanish Civil War would come to an end, and a person called Francisco Franco would take charge. Now, just sort of for a feeling of what this person was, I feel like nobody would really fight me if I were to say that Franco was the Hitler of Spain. I don't know if that is a controversial opinion, but the man was fascist. He had friends both in fascist Italy and in Nazi Germany. And during the Second World War, he had all of his critics jailed as political prisoners, he banned languages in Spain, and also established a spy network tasked with keeping an eye on Spanish citizens, in order again to keep order, in order to make sure that only the propaganda that he is selling, that only what he is basically filtering through the public gets published.
In turmoil. Political, economic, and cultural disputes divided Spaniards. Civil unrest erupted into civil war.
July 1936. The Spanish Civil War became a proving ground for Nazi Germany, Fascist Italy, and Soviet Russia.
The nationalists, conservative and mostly Catholic, led by Generalissimo Francisco Franco, launched a rebellion against the Republican communist leftists that quickly cut Spain in half.
In the Republican side, priests were persecuted. That is a fact, and they were killed.
Because of these limitations on the freedom of speech, churches would even be burned. And getting into a place where you can worship anything, regardless of your religion, people would have to step over dead bodies to just even get to the churches. And Escriva himself, during this period, lived as a religious refugee. He even posed as a mental patient at this asylum, where he would just secretly pray. He would just secretly practice his faith.
Brutal religious persecutions ensued. Churches were burned, clergy were hunted.
We're coming out of a period in which anybody who was a practicing Catholic in Spain probably had the experience of having to step over bodies to get to church. There were 4,000 priests who were killed, dozens of bishops, hundreds of sisters, in some cases lined up against walls in very public ways and shot to death by the Republican forces.
Forced underground, Escriva lived as a religious refugee, in fear and on the run. He found safe haven in this attic. He posed as a mental patient in an asylum for 5 months. Through it all, Escriva secretly celebrated masses and heard confessions.
What this meant for Opus Dei and what people cannot agree upon online is whether this made Jose Maria Escriva then sort of support Franco, because Franco ruled Spain for 36 years. So this would be a substantial amount of time if you have just founded this organization that you think you have been enlightened to do so, then to make sure that it persists, that it actually goes on. So there is the debate that a lot of people who were prominent in power were also part of Opus Dei, and that in that light, Opus Dei and Jose Maria Escriva had to be Franco's supporters. And then there's other people that say that it is the exact opposite reasoning of why he wasn't. Because, you know, he had to do it in secret, because he had to practice this, and because on the back of that, it makes that message and that idea even stronger, that you, as an ordinary person, are going to just pursue your religion and your practices no matter what, whether even it is underground, whether it is in the same conditions that Escriva did during Franco's regime. According to the documentary that I mentioned, people say that the most unbiased opinion would be to say that he was neither the supporter nor that he was against it. Rather, that Opus Dei was to stay outside of the political framework.
It is not a political option. It is an option of survival of faith.
I think the fairest thing you can say is that Escriva was neither pro-Franco nor anti-Franco. It's a fair matter for debate that he should have been more anti-Franco, particularly as the injustices of the regime became clear. He was trying to follow his vision. His vision was that as an organization, Opus Dei was simply going to stay out of the political fray.
As the Spanish Civil War ended in 1939, Escriva, standing in the midst of the ruins of all of these churches, just had that idea that this had to be done, even further enforced in his head. And for him to actually found these legitimate organizations, that meant he had to have a blueprint. And this is when he wrote what is known as The Way, which is just about 999, if I remember right, maxims. Basically like these little guidelines for people, speaking about character, speaking about privacy, actually emphasizing on privacy, and how you shouldn't really be sharing the ins and outs of these organizations with everybody. At this time, this foundational document would have reached about 50 people. There were about 50 people in the group at the time, with the guidelines like, if you don't get up, you won't seize the day. He was just basically Hakuna Matataing through the life, just in the end of 1930s. Of course, 50 people wouldn't cut it, and the idea was always to spread the word. Now, you can see how it was easy for this organization to grow in Spain. There were no horror stories, there was no internet at the time. Even if something shady was to be going on, how would you really go about making sure that you inform others? But also, you can see it from the very positive side. Like, his message can relate even to me when it comes to the relaying of holiness, basically sanctifying yourself for your day-to-day life, where you bring it into whatever you're doing, whether it is cooking, whether it is going for work, sort of getting that outside of the church. But then what you have to think about is, how do you translate that to other countries? So again, it will come as no surprise that in 1940s, right after the Second World War, he would bring it to the countries nearby. He started off with Portugal, with Italy, and then he brought Opus Dei to the UK. The organization is still there, by the way. There is sort of an HQ in London, if I check that right. You can read up articles, you can inform yourself, you can probably go onto the premises as well. If anybody is interested, if that is where this story leads you to, which I kind of hope it's not, but do as you wish. And Escriva will live long enough to see this organization thrive and become the organization that he intended it to be. So much so that in 1950, the secretive constitution of Opus Dei was published, stating that no one must reveal to anyone that they themselves belong to Opus Dei. That year, Opus Dei was also given the approval by the Pope at the time. And in 1975, Jose Maria Escriva would die, leaving behind a movement of sorts that at that point had about 60,000 members.
On June 26, 1975, following a morning meeting with women members, Escrivá returned to Villa Tevere, the Opus Dei global headquarters in Rome, collapsed in this room, and died of heart failure. He was 73. I have to thank God for these 50 years of work. Like a little donkey, I find myself before God, pulling the cart. This has been the job I've devoted myself to. Today, deep below the street within the Our Lady of Peace Chapel in Villa Tevere, encased in glass lie the remains of Saint José María Escrivá.
You have heard that right. José María Escrivá would be announced a saint. He would be canonized years later. But before we talk about that, before we talk about where Opus Dei is today, we are going to break this down into sort of like step by step, and then have a day in a life, and then have different possible control methods that they use to keep you there. First of all, to recruit you, to keep you there, and then not really to let you leave, or rather to have the grip on you. And we are about to discuss what is and what is not voluntary, the practices, and as I mentioned, we are here to talk about the dark side of things. As this Reverend James Martin would put it, I think 90% of the members of Opus Dei are good, devout Catholics, but 10% of their activities really raise serious questions about their methods, most especially their recruiting and some of the things that go on inside their houses. What goes on inside of those houses? For you to understand that, we have to understand how they even get to Opus Dei, how they even get to that stage. What is the catch? What is the selling point? Who is the target audience? And how does the recruiting process work? Joining Opus Dei in itself is a long process, which requires commitment, and that is usually the selling point wherever they try to sell it, which, as you will learn soon, is mostly university and college campuses. In order for you to join Opus Dei, it can take as long as 5 years, and the members need to be at least 18 years old. Although from some of the stories that I have read back in the day, that age limit was kind of 16 and a half. Sometimes they would recruit people who are younger. And I say recruiting, and this is the part that I would like explained to me by believers, by people who might have actually been through Opus Dei and have had a positive experience. As we will learn later in the story, they will live on the premises. They will live in certain houses, apostolates. They will live with the people who are in Opus Dei. They will leave their families behind, etc. And if the whole message, if the whole point is to experience holiness through everyday life, work, whatever you do, then why? Doesn't it kind of defy that whole message? At least in my head, it does. It kind of contradicts it. I don't know if I'm missing out on something. Let me know how you see this particular part. But as I mentioned, really the target audience would be colleges and universities. And that is because most of the residence centers would be near the cities where mostly college and universities will be based. So that leads you to believe that Opus Dei seeks mostly young people. Representatives of Opus Dei will say that this happens for two main reasons. One is commitment to Opus Dei is commitment for life. It is the commitment to your faith, meaning that they have the answers, but they're not simply just a set of documents that somebody can read. It is a way of life, and it's also a commitment to a cause. A different approach as to why they're targeting students in particular is that this is the great time to grow your faith. Youth, according to Finnerty, who is this representative that is mentioned in multiple articles for Opus Dei, youth is the time when people are open to great generosity, when they're trying to think about things, think about the meaning of their lives and their plans for them. This in turn means that youth is a tremendous time for a person to grow in their faith, and so that's something that Opus Dei tries to help people to do.
Opus Dei also actively recruits Catholic college students who are invited to attend retreats and other spiritually themed gatherings.
Evangelization is a mission of the church. It's not something that Opus Dei invented. Every Christian is called to evangelize. We're called to spread the message of Christ.
This commitment goes both as a pro and as a con of Opus Dei, depending on which side you believe in more, which side makes more sense to you. Because if you see it as a pro, you can think about how long that recruitment process really is. By the end of it, the person really knows if they want to join or not. I have found different sources stating it's 5 years. This documentary mentions it's 6.5 years. So they really say that they don't let people just join. Like, oh, you read the Way from Escriva, or you read like some scriptures, and then you decide like, oh, this is definitely for me. That just doesn't happen. You have to go through a rigorous process that we will break down a bit later, and they really want to ensure that the people that are joining it are the right people who want this commitment for life.
People have charged over the years that they are deceptive about it. They will sometimes bring people into their orbit before really telling them that this is Opus Dei, that they will pressure them to make profound life commitments before they really understand what it's about.
We were always being encouraged to get more members, make friends, bring them into formation somehow, bring them around the center, try to find out where they are in their spiritual life. Do they have the qualities to become a member of Opus Dei?
Opus Dei denies that it exerts any undue pressure. They say potential candidates endure a lengthy period of spiritual study before gaining full membership.
From the very first formation that I went to, I wanted to join Opus Dei immediately, and they wouldn't let me. They said, not yet, slow down, take your time, you need to learn more about us.
But then on the other end of that coin, you had the recruiters from Opus Dei going into these college cities, college towns, and sort of trying to integrate themselves into these groups of friends. And obviously these are Catholic colleges and universities, so they would just be there, not telling them they're from Opus Dei. They would just be like, listening to the conversations, being like, what are these people sharing? What are they like in their faith? How do they like to practice it? Are they pro-secrecy? Everything like that. And then they trap you. Then they tell you, oh my God, you should really check out this organization. I'm totally, not from there, but I have inside information on it. And that is how they get you. Opus Dei will, of course, deny any allegations that any pressure is then put on people and that this is how they do it. They say that they are open from the get-go. My personal main reason where I would like to be contradicted with your thoughts yet again in the comments for kind of believing that there is not everything that is revealed here by the actual people from Opus Dei about their tactics is, why is the target group just young people? Why not actually try, do the trial and error where there are studies then that somebody can read upon, where, maybe you have had residencies or you have placed yourselves in different parts of city. There are churches everywhere. They're like places where you can target people, potential recruitees, anywhere. You could go and try the audience, which is between, 20s and 30s, 40s and 50s. Why have I only in every single source read that their recruiting pool is college students? Yes, there is the commitment for life, but also, if you think about the other side of that, they would be easily impressionable. They would be the people to target if you want this organization to grow and expand. And throughout this story, I will be involving two experiences, sort of two testimonials that we have. Something to bear in mind is that they're both from 70s and 80s, kind of ending by early 90s, ending their experience in Opus Dei. And most of the experiences and testimonials that I have found, which kind of give you the insight of like the life within, the day-to-day, are from that period of time. So just something to have in the back of your head, but trust me, there are stories that have happened recently, that have come to light recently, just not in that detail. And I will be including these two stories, rather just the bits and pieces of them, and we'll link the testimonials below if anybody wants to read. These are the stories of Denis Dubrow and Tommy Di Nicola, who separately have spent a long time in Opus Dei. And I will be including them sort of to give you the feel of all of these different points that we are speaking about. Dennis Dubrow will be giving us the testimony of their 17 years in Opus Dei, and they were recruited in 1969 as he was studying physics at the MIT. He says that from how that looked from her point of view is that there was definitely a certain amount of pressure in order for you to join. And that pressure is either through these carefully staged vocational crises, meaning that the reason why these recruiters actually attend any meetings, any societies, sort of infiltrate these groups, is exactly to spot the vulnerable people. And then they would target them at the most vulnerable moments in recruits' lives. Sometimes these recruiters would say that God calls people at certain times in their lives, kind of referencing Escriva at certain points, some of them would not. And if the recruits were to say no, that would mean that they would never receive God's grace in their lives because they're on the wrong track. And what's better and when is the better timing to set yourself on the right track than now? For Dennis himself, they weren't as vulnerable as maybe other people would be, but Dennis actually as a child practiced Catholic faith, they would always go to church, they practiced it at home, so once they went to college, they kind of had a cultural shock where other students didn't really understand them. So they would go to chaplaincy, and that is kind of how they met other people from Opus Dei. Once people from Opus Dei reached out to Dennis and told him a bit about the center, they decided to go in for a visit. Dennis would describe that whenever they would visit, always there would be a pastor, a priest, just paraded, just there to answer any question, to sort of squash any doubts that they might have. And they would always be reminding him how this is a legitimate organization, legitimate group that is operating under the Catholic Church. And trusting his upbringing, trusting the religion, Dennis decided to join. Now that is what the recruitment strategy was on Dennis from the outside. However, he also gave us the insight of how this works from the inside, giving us the insight of something that is called the cell technique. And cell technique is basically what communists have used, where people would be organized into cells or circles based upon their profession or based upon their community. And one can never talk about other members and doesn't meet others unless they're working on similar projects or apostolates. Think about this from your own point of view within your department at your workplace. Like, they would sort of see out of the new recruits or old recruits which ones came with a Catholic college background, which pool basically they already hired. And then, there's always that person that has a bit more inside information. So during the rush week, like freshers weeks, they would kind of come knocking at their doors, asking them for information, like, where should we go? You come from this uni, okay, how do we access it? How do we infiltrate these groups? That's sort of the whole purpose of the cell technique. The other controversial point comes from this point on, when they sort of break ties after this screening with the world, with the real world so far, with the world that they have known, and make this decision. And the controversy here is whether it is optional and to what degree.
I think the most important thing that Opus Dei has done for me is to help me understand the right balance that my life should have, the right balance between work, family, being a husband, golfing, and my faith in God.
These deeply faithful Catholics, sometimes called Orthodox Catholics, follow a rigorous daily routine of Mass, prayer, and spiritual formation.
It's not signing up at a health club. Being a member of Opus Dei is a divine vocation, so God calls that person. Many people come into contact with Opus Dei, attend their activities, and don't join because it isn't for everyone.
Many people, once they meet somebody from Opus Dei, would come to one of the talks, maybe talk to the priests, and realize it's not for them. And I know I'm making comparisons here with the Elan school, but one comparison that I found truly fascinating and that kind of persists throughout this whole story is that here the families, the parents in particular, don't put the pressure on the children, like in none of these testimonials that I have read. So with the second person that I told, I will be sort of telling you bits and pieces of their story, Tammy Di Nicola. She was a freshman at Boston College at the time, and with her parents were happy that she decided to make this step and to go to the first Opus Dei retreat because of her just deepening her faith while at school. Now, this is what they thought it will be. The limited amount of talks that she would go to, possibly, just going after school every day, they didn't think that it's going to escalate. So Di Nicola, without telling her parents, joined Opus Dei in her junior year. She joined to become a numerary. We're going to speak about that in a second. But this is the lay person that pledges celibacy and devotion to God's teachings. She would, like so many others, move into an all-female Opus Dei residence and slowly start breaking all of her ties with her friends and her family. Di Nicola's mom didn't like this change in her personality, didn't like that she's stepping away from her friendship group and from her own family, and even begged her daughter to consider other options within the church. But at this point, it was too late. So how does that switch happen? There are particular techniques out of which I think I have put here 4 that the recruitment team uses. I love how I'm saying it as if it is like HR department, but it kind of is. The titles of the people that you have seen in this documentary, head of HR department, they have their own departments. They have the official kind of business that they are doing within the company, and a big part of it is getting people over that threshold, getting people to commit, getting people to understand that this is the life commitment and to actually at least dedicate 5 to 6 years to it for them to be taken seriously. So one of the points of how this is done is something I have put down as the internal rewards. So again, going back to how this would work in an actual workplace. Here, because of how highly structured these apostolates are, Opus Dei members form teams and develop strategies to attract new members. They would have these daily get-togethers, sort of like, huddles, all hands meetings, where they would be discussing promising recruits. And of course, then the goal is for the people to actually be rewarded if they get the most amount of recruits, to earn respect in that way, which brings us to the referral scheme. So the members are typically taught to always have 12 to 15 quote-unquote friends. And those are then to have at least 3 or 4 that are very close to joining. So this means once they go into those college campuses, once they go into those societies, they're using the friends card as bait. And often Opus Dei members would just drop those friends who are unlikely to join Opus Dei because that's just not useful to them. Then they can move on to a different friendship group, and in that way the circle is also big. So sometimes they know who the potential recruits are, even though they're not in their presence, even though they're miles away, just because they have heard it from, a different friend in that same pool. Just like with every single job, they have to report their stats. They would be filling out these forms on their friends, which can include the following. So, number of apostolic visits that they have made, the meditations that they have attended, the retreats made, the confessions with an Opus Dei priest, etc., etc. And if you wonder why is that information needed, well, the recruits don't know that they're being discussed and targeted in this way, which in turn is the violation to some sort of GDPR, privacy rights of just like freedom, etc. So not only do these people then go into those groups and people don't know that they're being infiltrated, societies don't know that they're being infiltrated, but then even after They sort of have conversations and sort of think of strategies about how to get you to join. The last point on the recruitment and how they really get you to go over that threshold, I named LinkedIn. Basically, it is scouting. You know, either on LinkedIn you get that notification like 47 people discovered your profile this week, and you're like, who the hell are they? Why don't I see who they are unless I upgrade to premium or whatever? Or you get that message about like, hey, I have seen your profile, you know, the template, and I would like to discuss this job role, or like, we have this job role, and you're like, what job? How did this come about? Because this job does not fit whatever you saw in my profile. Well, here we're talking about similar levels of infiltration, without the other party, the possible recruits, knowing that they're being infiltrated. And why this is under a completely different section in this part of the video is because this goes beyond just individual recruits. There are groups that are at universities that are officially affiliated with Opus Dei. It's just that people who attend them have no idea that that is the case. Opus Dei members would join these groups in order to find and befriend individuals that are likely to join their organization. Now, they also attempt to attract potential supernumerary members by infiltrating parishes throughout different parts of the world. Now, what this means is that it is often very difficult to determine the extent of their influence in any given university and in any given parish. And that is because of that secrecy, that is the core to it all. Because Opus Dei members very often and very successfully conceal their identity to any outsiders. This part and just everything when it comes to recruiting is such reverse psychology mindfuck for me, because even if you are chosen, the catch here is that you, as the potential recruit, also need to choose Opus Dei, while not knowing the basics about them, while not really knowing what they're about. It is just because you believe, either because you have been introduced by a friend, again, which we have spoken about, has also been infiltrated by the Opus Dei. It's all about, you know, it's a friend of a friend who recommended this to me. It is a commitment for life. And then that is how they hook you. Now, after the meeting, you're still not a member, you're still not in. You have to write something that is called the spiritual direction. And for this section, we need to familiarize ourselves with two terms that are referring to the members of the Opus Dei. The first one is supernumeraries, and this is the largest group of people that they recruit, currently about 70% of the total membership group. They're usually married, men and women with careers. They devote portions of their day to prayers, and they attend different meetings, take part in activities like retreats. So this group is technically not committed to the organization and not available to them at all times, but they contribute financially, and they would offer any type of assistance if they can. Then there are the numeraries, who take about 20% of the total membership group. They're the celibate members, and they give themselves in full availability for whatever the prelature, whatever Opus Dei has in mind for them. Let's say you have attended one of their talks, you have maybe attended multiple, they're called formation, and after those you might have asked for some spiritual direction from a priest or just any other member. Through that spiritual direction, you might believe this is your cause. You might want to commit to this for life. In that case, and if the directors of the local center, wherever you have been attending these talks, would agree, then you are allowed to write a letter in order to be admitted. This is only the first letter. There's at least two from different testimonials that I have heard. This would then be a letter from you, depending on what role you want to commit to. So if it is a supernumerary role, the letter would be sent to regional vicar in the region where the center is located. If it is numerary or associate, so like working basically as some sort of cleaning or like servant kind of role, then you would send a letter to the prelate of Opus Dei in Rome. And this is the letter of you asking to become a numerary, supernumerary, or the associate. So it's important to know at this point you're still not a member of Opus Dei. If you requested admission to become a numerary, then you can move into the center of the work as soon as it's practical for you, as soon as you can basically cut ties with your friends and family. And you can begin to live the life of numerary close by. You can sort of observe what is done, you can have a taster of sorts. Then there is another letter that they have to write. What I found so interesting, and I kind of think it is yet another core of this whole organization, and that is that the first letter that she wrote, that is called Whistling, just had no validity in the place of church. And something that I want to point out, and I wish to be contradicted in the comments, is that I've never seen anybody say like, oh, they responded to me, you know, the letter was acknowledged by this person that is, you know, high up in the church. I have been acknowledged that this has been read, you know, something that would make you feel like special, that somebody actually cared about you joining. And now when thinking about the numbers of people that they have, of course that might not be feasible, but it makes me believe whether all of these letters and a lot of things that we're going to be talking about later on is just pro form. It's just coming out of somebody's head as they go along. And whose head? I am not sure. Probably people on the top who are running this organization. Let me know if I'm mistaken. So she wrote basically 2 letters. The first one apparently didn't count for anything. The second letter, that is called the admission, is apparently also non-binding in nature. It doesn't bind you to the law of the church, but they don't tell you that. And according to Dennis, a member can leave at any time without penalty and without asking for permission. 2 key words in this case. But the directors would never tell you that. You only find out years later, once you have either been trained in leadership, you hear it there, or once you leave. But by that point, because that second letter can be written sometime after, you're already so integrated, you already are committed, and it might be too late for you to now decide to back out. Let's say you have now written 1 letter, maybe the second one, but that first one is out of the way. You have written it, you have written to them that you actually want to live as a numerary, you actually want to live on their premises. So you have now been admitted. And for the period of formation that lasts usually about 6 months, you receive an extensive series of talks. They are called the programma, and they are about nature of the work, life in Opus Dei, and also the Catholic scriptures, the Catholic doctrine. The programma, just like the recruitment, just like every step here, ensures that before you're formally admitted, you know exactly what you are committing to. So they're not really lying to you, they're not trying to hide anything that you're about to commit to. I will put it on the screen, but what the highlights of this are, these couple of points that Programma focuses on, is that you will be following what is called a plan of life. Basically, as many prayers throughout as many times a day as you can think of, and you are also supposed to provide economic support for the group. Yet again, a couple of things as a sideline that stood out to me here just before we talk about what happens after the programma and once they're actually in. Few things that really kind of stand out yet again with the whole recruitment process is going back to that choice that you have, but where you also feel like you are the chosen one. It works with anything if you think about it. Recruitment on LinkedIn, influencers and how they are poached for any kind of business partnerships, any kind of ads, Harry Potter. It works in this world, and also then that leads you to believe, why wouldn't it have worked ever since 1928, especially during the periods where the internet wasn't a thing. You, again, don't hear any sort of bad stories, you don't hear the horror parts of it, you don't really know fully what you are committing into, but you feel like, A, it is a commitment for life, you know upfront exactly what you're going into, or at least you think you know. And then also you feel like they want you there. You feel like you have just been chosen to join this great cause. So after the program, after that formal admission, you and the director would sort of sit down. If both of you agree that this is your vocation, you are then formally admitted to the work. This is a verbal contract between you and Opus Dei, in which you agree to try to live the spirit of Opus Dei, to live that plan of life, follow, any sort of guidelines that they offer, try to carry out an active apostolate, and you also agree to help any apostolic activities on the prelature. Basically, help out as much as possible and live according to the rules of the house where you are now placed. After you have that verbal agreement, you would have your next one-to-one assessment of sorts a year from then. And then you will decide whether or not you want to become a fully fledged member. And if you do, you become one of the multiple membership groups that they have. You could become supernumerary, as we mentioned, that is about 70% of the members. They are the non-celibate, they can get married, they can contribute financially, rather they're expected to contribute financially to Opus Dei, and then demonstrate their values, their Christian values, in their daily activities. The second largest group would be numeraries, and that is the one that we will be focusing on today, because they are the ones that get to experience the Opus Dei centers. And here they are segregated by sex, and they are celibate for life.
The next largest category consists of the numerary. Nearly 30% celibate males and females who live in Opus Dei centers, and whose vows of celibacy are a unique commitment in today's modern world.
These people have chosen to live a fairly controlled and disciplined life of spiritual sacrifice. If you've chosen to live that life, you've got to take it on its own terms. And by definition, that's going to be something that's hard for the outside world to understand.
Numeraries are not allowed to associate with anybody who is a critic, who is speaking badly of Opus Dei, or rather anybody who is a former member, unless they're trying to recruit them back into the group. They are told, just like everybody else, to have a list of about 15 friends, and the top ones on the list should be the people with the potential to join Opus Dei. So you can see how the hierarchy in itself, yes, is there for people to basically decide what they want to do, to have all of the freedom in the world that they want, but it's also there for the benefits of Opus Dei, to continue that circle of recruitment that we have spoken about. The way they live in those centers is segregated, so men and women, of course, have different sort of dorms. And it is so strict that there must be double doors with separate keys for each gender. They are not allowed to talk to one another unless it is to do with the way of life, unless it is to do with Opus Dei. And a typical conversation is conducted by a house phone. Of course, they don't have their own phones. It contains no words or greetings or personal inquiry. Like, you can't ask, how are you? You can't engage in any small talk. It is just of passing the information that is needed.
A numerary member of Opus Dei usually has a profession which he exercises. I am a singer. I also conduct a choir. And then I'm involved in apostolic activities and also give spiritual guidance to some members of Opus Dei.
And then there is one last level to the hierarchy, and those are numerary assistants, or sometimes called auxiliaries. And these are the people that are coming in, all women, to be precise, that are celibate, that devote themselves specifically to the physical care and cleaning of Opus Dei centers. In one of these testimonials, I have read that they are treated poorly. Because of that segregation, they're actually even distant from everybody else. It is as if they can't actually speak freely or just speak to anybody at all, otherwise they're probably gonna get penalized. So the way this works is there would be a whole floor, usually a ground floor, that would be locked for everybody else until 11 a.m. to prevent all of the numeraries from having any contact with the invisible people, people who are cleaning and tidying up their rooms every single day. One morning, this person said like they accidentally went upstairs and they were kind of like locked in the room with them, and the assistant, the numerary assistant, seemed like really anxious. She just wasn't saying anything. It was again just like as if they're not allowed to say anything. And as soon as the room was unlocked, well, this person kind of realized maybe they're gonna get in trouble, so she just kind of ran away. It gives me very much Hunger Games vibe, you know, with the, what are they called? I'll figure it out by the time I'm putting the video. The one that are mute and like have their tongues taken out. For somebody who is always a fake fan, you live up to that expectation. You live up to the expectation of a fake fan. Another thing that might boil your blood when it comes to the auxiliaries, to these assistants, is of how they're recruited. There is a huge difference in recruitment, at least in my opinion, because usually the assistant numeraries are recruited from rural, poor, and uneducated backgrounds. While numeraries can have sort of different jobs within their houses, assistant numeraries cannot. They cannot have any position of authority, and they also can't work outside the Opus Dei houses. And according to plenty of sources, they always have to be supervised. They can never be just left fully alone. Even if they're cleaning, they have like somebody from the numerary membership type who is always on their case. This is for supervision purposes, but it is also because they can't have any money. They can't have access to any money, which means that numeraries have to pay for anything. The way that Opus Dei wants us to see this decision for these roles to only be taken by women is just see it as a stay-at-home mom. This is the person that is acting as a mother of a family. And the reasoning is that women have a special genius for domestic care, and men just lack it. They just can't crack it. They just can't clean the toilet. They just can't vacuum. Like, just make us see reason. That is the legitimate reasoning that they have given. Now that you're a bit more familiar with the recruitment processes, with how they get people, and then once they join, what sort of roles they fulfill, let's talk a bit about hierarchy, a bit about organization. Like, if you were to walk into Opus Dei, how would these centers really look like? Opus Dei, as mentioned, is divided into two sections, one for men, one for women. And if you have been thinking that up until now some of these rules and just the regulations, just the systems in place seem ridiculous, well, Opus Dei has its own government. So basically internally they have a government that is split in 3 levels. Individual centers of Opus Dei are then administered by a local council under a director. So when I mention these terms, this is what it means. It's the person inside that is on that level in the hierarchy. And directors are subject to regional commission under a vicar. And both are then subject to a central government in Rome that consists of a general council under the authority of the prelate, who is called the father. Above that, you have the General Congress, that is a separate Congress for women, separate for men, and they're called, in special circumstances, to elect the major offices of government and to discuss, review, and set long-term policies. Because that was a definite read-through and just sort of a snapshot of the hierarchy, let me actually tell you a bit about how this works. Once you're actually elected to be appointed to the office of the government, like Denis Dubrow was. Denis would be responsible for day-to-day maintenance, for budgeting, mostly for the dormitories of the houses where they would all be living in. Denis got this position as the bursar of Warren College, and at that point he had some business experience, but they weren't qualified to work as a bursar. They definitely weren't qualified to work in accounting. What this means is that once Denis was put into one such position, after obviously attending Opus Dei, attending the way of life, attending all of the scriptures and everything else, he didn't know how to do the real job. And if you think about it, like if they are all hired like the person in this story was, recruited rather, not hired, if they were recruited into Opus Dei when they are basically teenagers during their college and university years, they would have never even had the opportunity to have a job experience, which means that they have never been taught how to do any secular work. So for years, they're taught one thing, and that is that if you're ever given any sort of work, any sort of job, that it is your duty to do it to the highest professional standards. But get this, on the day when Denis Dubrow was hired, the director just hushed him to the side, telling him that despite all what he has been told for the past 9 years about all of this doing their work to the best standards, there are some exceptions. The exceptions were that Opus Dei wasn't really following standard accounting practices, and that is because they were wasteful and legalistic. It's too much legal work, so they have to have connection with God. That is truly what they said. That it was more important to do the apostolate and bring souls to God and Opus Dei. So, of course, what this means is that Dennis started spotting a couple of things just weren't done to the highest standards when it came to the accounting. At the first glance of all of the accounts, Denis Dubrow realized that the audits that they have been submitting have just been signed off based off of the conviction that it is the Holy Catholic Group. Basically, they played a Theranos card, which Theranos did with like Walgreens, where somebody just believed them because of the power that they have had, while all of these audits for the financial state of the dormitories were actually faulty. Here, Dubrow decides to do what a lot of us would have chosen to do in this situation. Try to salvage it. Try to actually go through all of these audits, spot the errors, and submit the new ones. But because he was given like such tight deadlines on everything else that was new in the job, the directors honed in on this, that they're not meeting all of these deadlines, and have told them this is not really in the best interest, because it is a waste of their time. And you will realize that the directors are the ones who have the last word here, meaning that they decide what is obedience and what is disobedience. And because it is their decision, everything that Dennis was doing, technically that was against the will, it was not just, submitting the recent ones to their tight deadlines, was considered a disobedience. I will put on the screen all of the issues that Denis Dubrow had spotted while he was working there for the office as the bursar. So, sort of to summarize those, it looked like some money was being laundered for a non-profit educational holding company. Then also, they were told that the company was trying to show a profit even though they were losing money. So basically, both Opus Dei was losing money and owing money to people, and money was owed to them. Now, what this meant for day-to-day life for Dennis was that they would sometimes see all of these bank accounts that wouldn't have any money in it, or the balance would be negative. But they were also always assured that there is cash. It's just kept in these drawers and the company still has plenty of cash. They just don't keep it in the banks for whatever reason. When shit hit the fan and the truth finally started unraveling itself was once the auditor that was already assigned to Opus Dei died. So they were forced to find a new one. And this new person basically shut down the office for a full investigation. And at the end of it, they concluded that the directors were guilty of gross negligence by appointing an inexperienced person like Dennis. This audit from 1979 still exists, and there are probably a limited amount of people that have access to it. But now when you think about this, you must think like, how has none of the centers been shut down because of this yet? And that is where we need to focus on having the unbiased opinion. And the unbiased opinion, as learned from this documentary, is that nothing shady is going on financially. Members simply have to donate a significant part of their income, of their salaries, to Opus Dei. And because this isn't an organization that is centralized, it isn't really regulated, just like, your parish would be possibly, I don't know what I'm talking about, and it doesn't publish the general accounts, it kind of is difficult to be precise about its true state of finances. As again, the secrecy means that they don't really have to, unless it is auditors, in which case it can be sealed, like it happened with Denis Dubrow.
They're expected to give most of their paycheck from their regular jobs.
All the numeraries of Opus Dei, we receive a salary and we pay from our salary. Obviously, we pay for our personal needs, whatever our expenses may be. And as a rule, we give everything else to supporting Opus Dei and the apostolates.
In their defense, that's what the apostles did. The apostles lived sort of communally. The early Christian church did that. They cared for one another. So, in a sense, you could say they're living more Christian than other Catholics are.
If you are to trust the documentary, people like Denis Dubrow are lying. There's just no amounts of cash that are kept on the ready, there's no bags of cash kept in the drawers.
Opus Dei's financial affairs are also a private issue. There have been long-standing concerns about the size of its wealth and how that money influences the Catholic Church.
Usually what conspiracy theorists will say is that Opus Dei had come in, for example, with bags of cash to bail out the Vatican Bank because of its crisis in the late 70s.
In his revealing book, Opus Dei, Allen, with an independent church financial analyst, followed the money by examining thousands of documents, along with public records and paperwork submitted by Opus Dei.
The practical reality is that Opus Dei simply does not have the bags of cash that a lot of people imagine it does.
And also, Opus Dei is not just trying to control the elections of the popes, neither is it trying to control the inner workings of the Vatican.
If you look at the financial profile of Opus Dei, their total assets is about $340 million. Their total worldwide assets, the best estimate, is about $2.8 billion. Now, you compare that to a group like the Knights of Columbus, which is almost entirely an American organization, has a financial base that is some 3 times larger than Opus Dei. And yet nobody thinks that the Knights of Columbus are scheming to manipulate the election of the Pope or to control the inner workings of the Vatican.
According to Dubrow, it is not only the finances that were managed in this way that makes the people believe that there is truly something secretive and something that Opus Dei is trying to cover up for. Rather, everybody was free to do anything under the directors. And directors were the ones that were making the rules, just like when it came to her position as the bursar, her telling her how she's supposed to do her job without any of them actually being qualified. She talks about this event where basically they were suspecting that the girls were sneaking into the males' dormitories, so upon the director's approval, they locked all of the fire exit doors. And they locked them saying that it's better for all of them to burn in this life than for a few to burn in hell. So once they reported this for safety reasons, and purely because this is insane, well, the university decided to unlock the doors eventually, but they were told that the members had no authority or business doubting the word of the director of Opus Dei. They were told that the directors are accountable to God alone for their actions, and members are supposed to choose to spend their time doing, the apostolic work. That is why they recruited them after all, instead of time checking the word of the directors. And you really can't speak up, because just like with so many practices that we spoke about in Ilan's school video, individualism here is heavily discouraged, meaning that the group thinking has to prevail. If they tell you the directors are always right, you eventually have to agree. And here you have to think about just how well-oiled of an operation this really is. So some methods that they use, they would trip you into feeling the social guilt. If you were to share an individual opinion and not agree with the group, you were probably going to be called selfish. Then also even physically, even how their rooms and premises are designed are all in such a way to enforce these rigid rules and regulations. So numeraries always either live in single or triple rooms, And this discourages them to become like really close to people, and also from the temptation to just gossip around. The only time that you would possibly even be able to talk about that is called time of night. The silence is enforced and encouraged during that time. And the only friendships that you are allowed to have are with potential recruits. All of the other friends are a waste of your time. To top that all off, your identity is heavily defined by how you behave, how you spend your time, what you wear, meaning like what you're spending, even the limited amount of your salary that you can spend on yourself on, who your friends are, where you work, etc., etc. So let's say if you spend too much time on your job just fussing over what you're wearing and insist on getting together, like actually going back to your old life, meeting with friends and family, then they're going to again call you selfish. And selfishness is considered a sin because you're taking away from the mission of Opus Dei. And I cannot emphasize enough how many times this documentary was like 45 minutes long. I swear at least like 5 or 6 times they have compared it to marriage. They have said, this is the commitment that is likened to marriage. A person who is married is making all of their income available to their spouse and their children. He's thinking of them first in terms of others. And then the other commitments that are not financial, well, you serve an ideal, and it is freely undertaken. There is no limitation to freedom, but rather this is seen as the exercise of it. As somebody who has been married for over 5 years, I can tell you it's nothing like this. Don't let this story discourage you from being married, because you can still freely do other shit. It should have never been compared to marriage, but hey, here we are. What I find to be interesting here is that you can see how eventually, just like with the Elan School and the troubled teen industry, once you're discouraged to speak up, to speak freely, eventually you just A, never talk about your doubts, but B, also you never talk about the real issues. You just live in this secrecy, thinking like you can't share anything with anybody, and that is because you can't. To finalize, speaking about the practices that are happening regularly in Opus Dei and aren't really even denied by the representatives in the documentaries, rather they're just seen differently, right? That are kind of leading to this veil of secrecy. We come to Opus Dei's darkest hour, self-harm and self-flagellation. So I will first summarize different parts of it, and then I'll put timestamp on the screen for like the most morbid things. So just that even if you want to listen to it, you can get a gist of what it is, and then if you don't want to listen to like the worst of it and like what these practices actually entail and be like emotionally scarred for life like I am, then you can skip that part. So what is corporal mortification or self-flagellation? As I told you, these are just glamorized words for doing self-harm. The way that Opus Dei sees it is that corporal mortification is a practice of physically enduring a minor amount of suffering. This is usually reserved for the numeraries, so for the ones that are celibate. And it includes either the traditional Catholic penances, such as using the cilice, which is it's like a choker for your leg. It's the light metal chain with the prongs that are worn around your thigh and can draw blood depending on how tight you put it around your thigh. Or this penance can be inflicted as a form of discipline, which is the name for a woven cotton strap. Basically a whip of sorts. The motivation for such penances and for you inflicting self-harm, according to Opus Dei, is in order to imitate Christ and to join him in sacrifice. And so it can be seen as a way of suffering in solidarity with other people in the world.
From the first centuries to now, no?
Was it expected of the Opus Dei members to self-flagellate, to engage in mortification?
On Saturdays. On Saturdays. It was terrible.
Is it something that you do? Do you engage in that practice?
Yes, of course. And it's no shame. I don't like to speak about that because of my privacy, and I'm shy in this term. That I can't deny. I live the mortification of the flesh, it is necessary to search the holiness.
Here we go with the timestamp on the screen, not because we'll be sharing any graphic imagery or any graphic videos, which the documentary, if you want to watch it afterwards, actually does. It is purely because I will be going into more detail, and it is so triggering to me as well, just because even looking at Silas and looking at this woman, you exactly know how this goes. You know exactly what they practice, and it is triggering because they practice it under this premise that it's helpful to check the desires of the flesh. What you will hear over and over again is that mortification, which means dying to oneself, has a long history within the Catholic Church. So it can include everything from fasting on certain days with prayers to the corporal mortification. And it isn't a rare practice. It is practiced by the most respected individuals. Mother Teresa, Padre Pio, Oscar Romero, there are people in this documentary, that openly say there's nothing to be ashamed of. But if you look at it from a different perspective, there is a social guilt. There's a guilt trip there. Because if they tell you Mother Teresa did it, Jesus did it for you, who are you to say no to this? You can see how people, without any power of saying anything, can sort of be brainwashed into doing this. And in my opinion, you can argue with me all you want on this, once you actually commit to this and don't get out, even though you can get out and it is fully optional for you, you are far gone, just mentally far convinced that this is the truth, that this is something that you are committed to. And in my opinion, brainwashed to a certain degree already. The logic, or rather the lack of, doesn't stop there, because Escriva himself would accuse the secularized world, so the world outside of the Catholic Church and Opus Dei, in accepting physical pain and sacrifice in other domains, sort of like whether it is sports, whether it is business, personal beautifications like going to get your nails done, going to have a pedicure, going to basically have depilation. So why does it not apply when it comes to a religious purpose? Why can we not translate it that way? And then when you tell that to somebody who is already a practicing Catholic, who has been doing this for so long, might have been at a vulnerable point of their life when they actually were recruited to Opus Dei, of course, they're going to commit to it. Because according to multiple sources, the Silas in itself, that spiked chain, is worn on the upper thigh for 2 hours each day. So, is it a small sacrifice? It can be seen as such. There are exceptions where on certain days, like church feast days and Sundays, certain times of year, you actually can't use it. But now, with the cord-like whip, and also another story that I have read on BBC that was sort of just talking about self-flagellation, not really Opus Dei in itself, you kind of have to wonder, where does it stop? Because yes, you can have that premise in your head, I'm sacrificing myself because Christ did it on the cross, he died for us, because all of these respected members in this kind of community have done so. But then, how much sacrifice is enough? So with the cord-like whip, usually it is used on the buttocks and back once a week. And Opus Dei members need to ask for permission to use it more often, and many of them do. And they do because they hear the story that the founder, Escriva, was so keen on using this in his own discipline of himself that he would splatter the bathroom walls with a streak of blood, because he would use it so often and so viciously, because he was so committed to it. And then this BBC article that again doesn't really revolve around Opus Dei kind of also emphasizes the other side of that. Like, what if you want to go beyond that? What if those are not the only 2 instruments, quote unquote, that you want to use? And it mentions people using razor blades as being hardcore penitents to feel closer to Christ. So, many days they would read the Bible, attend the church, but then somebody, all of these people who might have been told that, this isn't enough sacrifice, that the founder used to do this, how much are you committing to it? How committed are you to this? Would basically take their faith to a completely different level. So yet again, I ask you, where does this stop then? At what point do you decide for yourself what is enough sacrifice, or do you let somebody else decide that for you? The expose of these practices would lead to, here in Britain in 1981, them banning the recruitment of people who were under 18. Probably for legality reasons, probably because they are more mature to make these decisions upon learning of such things. So basically there was like an expose article written in the Times, and this is the consequence of that. This, however, would not stop Opus Dei from growing. In 1982, it was established as a personal prelature, and in 2002, Jose Maria Escriva was canonized 27 years after his death. And then, the year after that, the Da Vinci Code was published. As mentioned, I did not watch the movie for this purpose because it's 2.5 hours long and because it focuses on a lot more things rather than just Opus Dei. So if there are any Da Vinci Code enthusiasts that can tell me what kind of effect this had on Opus Dei, on the vision of the church and everything like that, let me know in the comments. I know that there is debate online on whether it did more good than harm to the organization online. I have read that there was even a website competition on Opus Dei offering a chance to meet a real Opus Dei member, sort of to prove that the movie is basically exaggerating on all levels. And I have seen this in only one source. I couldn't find any other information on it online, but if correct, you can see how basically Opus Dei played the reverse Uno on them. You know, come and meet us, we are actually great, and how the publicity can escalate in that case once you see this representation and they offer you to actually showcase you something completely different. And there are other ways that discipline is enforced that aren't as brutal as Silas or that whip. I'll overlay them here on the screen, again sort of conscious of how long this video is taking, but it can be anything from cold showers, from them jumping first thing in the morning, kissing the floor, from silences at night, like not adding sugar to your coffee, skipping dessert, and you can kind of see how, again, a couple of things can happen once these are established. Additional layer of secrecy where people don't actually want or can't share because they think it will reflect badly on them as to like the degree of where this discipline is limited at and what they are actually doing to themselves, like what level of self-harm are they applying. Or the way I see it is thinking again, who decides on what? Who decides on anything in each house? Who decides what's acceptable, what isn't, and what degree of decisions can you make once you're in? Can you decide just to sleep on a slab on top of the mattress, or do you have to wear Silas 2 hours a day? Now the last bit on Opus Dei will be focusing on killing 2 birds with 1 stone. So first I will be telling you about a day in a life, sort of describing how this plan of life actually works, and then we're gonna be going through 4 mind control techniques that this organization might be using, just based off of the articles and sources online. So the plan of life, what does it truly mean? Well, it means that members are expected to fulfill daily, weekly, monthly, annual requirements. Daily ones include Mass, 1 hour of meditation, rosary, spiritual reading, examination of consciousness, different get-togethers with numeraries, basically as many prayers as you can think of. Weekly ones include confession, chats with directors, indoctrination class that's called the Circle. Numeraries, again, these are the celibates, are expected to attend a day of recollection on a monthly basis, then 5-day silent retreat annually, and 3-week course every year, consisting of indoctrination classes and recreation. So picture this, it is 5:40 in the morning, bright and early, you're fast asleep, most definitely in your regular life. Here, in this situation, there's a knock on the door, you jump out of the bed, You kiss the damn floor, and you silently say serviam, meaning I will serve in Latin. You then go for your cold shower, you start praying immediately. This is the perfect opportunity for you to use the whip to whip your buttocks before reciting a prayer. Then you have meditation, you have daily mass, you have breakfast, which would be another perfect opportunity to slip a silis on and wear it for the next 2 hours. This is when you do the cleaning, you vacuum the rooms, numeraries wear different kind of uniforms, and then the workers, so the auxiliaries, wear again a completely different color so that they can differentiate between the servants and the numeraries, I guess. This is followed by you meeting the director for the chat, and this is usually like internally chatting about the recruitment strategies and whatnot, after which you go to class to the university. This is followed by more prayers, and you have classes up until like 3:45 p.m. After that, you have that meeting that is called a circle, where you discuss the potential new members to Opus Dei. In the afternoon, you return to the center, you recite prayer cards, you have half an hour of meditation, you have dinner, followed by rosary and further prayers, then a class of Latin, and then study and homework. After that, at around 9 p.m., you have the get-together with all of the numeraries in the house. You yet again go back to business, discussing whistling, discussing the recruitment strategies, and after that, you have examination of consciousness, you have night prayers. Anybody that needs to leave a room, that needs to stay up later, needs to ask for director's permission. At around 10 p.m., you would kneel before your bed, you would recite a couple of prayers, and you would sprinkle the bed with holy water. And as we know, you mostly sleep with a board lying on top of the mattress and without a pillow once a week. Okay. Let us have a freaking breather before we dive into how potentially, thinking a couple of thoughts as I was reading that out, you can think that there is some controlling strategies there on a daily basis. If anything jumped at you from the structure of the buildings, the split between men and women, what clothing they're wearing, how they're differentiating themselves from the auxiliaries, what food they're eating and how they're limiting themselves to it, how much sleep they're getting, if you're really thinking about it, they're not really getting their 8 hours of sleep each and every night, probably less rather than more. And as well as the jobs, rituals, the get-togethers, the prayers and how they're attending them, how they're asking for permission, you can see that there is some level of behavior control that is implemented in Opus Dei. Like with every organization, the controls look small at first, like because they obviously monitor all of your expenses, because most of them, let's be honest, go to them. If you were to drink the coffee while at this office and the coffee costs, I don't know, 25 pence, well, you have to report it to somebody, and then you're kind of discouraged. You don't want to drink anything other than what's provided to you. Same applies to eating. When it comes to sleeping, if you can think about sleeping on a slab over the mattress, it can get super cold. You can't complain. There's also a night in a month where basically they have to stay up and pray throughout the night. It's called the all-night vigil, and the members sign up to pray in the middle of the night for 1 hour stretches. This cuts into sleep, it affects everything, and if you don't sign up, well, are you sacrificing enough? Are you doing enough? Then there's the clothing and just living depending on the hierarchy, where you also have to think, well, who put these rules into place? Numeraries were said to be wearing expensive clothes, while the assistant numeraries, of course, wear uniforms and a white apron, immediately dehumanizing them. The class differences are so obvious that numeraries also eat in different dining rooms with better quality food, while the assistant numeraries are usually left to eat the leftovers. Everything else is also different, whether it is the bed linen, whether it is the sleeping quarters, the bathrooms. Numeraries usually have the ensuite bathrooms, sort of like as part of their room, while the assistant numeraries have communal ones. All of that, the hierarchy, how they classify you, how they treat you differently, of course would control in turn your behavior. But one main reason why the behavior control might be present among the numeraries at least, it is their financial dependence. Because they surrender all control over their finances and their bank accounts to the directors. And then with the directors, they would have weekly meetings about the expenses, like whether it is car payments to go to work, student loans, credit cards. And this in turn means that they would be made feel guilty about asking for too much, because they have to ask for any other expenses that are not just like the basic ones, and are encouraged to have their friends and family pay for like any dinner. Like if you're going out, if you still want to keep in touch with your friends and family, we will judge you, and also they better provide money for that sort of trip. The second point here of control is control of information. And here, as you can imagine, there's all wild sorts of shit that again somebody had established one day, and it is just the crucial component of mind control in Opus Dei. The main thing used here that I have seen confirmed in multiple sources is the index of forbidden books. It sounds cool, right? Yeah. So books, articles, newspapers, magazines, radio, any sort of media that they are to consume, they would of course have to have it approved. If it's not already on that list, the chances of them reading that book are very small. And here I'm not talking like them having access to 50 Shades, okay? Which also means that they don't have access to any regular books, anything that isn't a scripture, anything that isn't actual Catholic kind of text. But also it means that they can't have access to any other scripture, but the ones that is chosen by whoever the director at the place is. They can't just choose to read, I don't know, about any other religion, for example. Again, everything working in such a way to limit their knowledge of the outside world. Ingoing and outgoing mail is also read by the directors, and because they read all the correspondence, they can decide what's deemed inappropriate and just shatter it to pieces, not even share it with the numeraries. And as expected, they have very little time for any sort of entertainment, any sort of vacations, because it's discouraged as it's waste of time, because you're not committed to what you basically committed to life. They are encouraged to have one excursion a month, and as you can imagine, this is more of a pilgrimage. It's either a hike. If it is a trip to the beach, they have to be covered with towels. You can kind of picture why, hiding what kind of marks that is the purpose for, and it's usually with other people that they know, so not like family and friends, other people from the same house under great supervision by the people in charge. Many people would not be super happy, super thrilled to just commit to this, to not have any outside contact, and would sometimes complain about whichever thing it is. It's human freaking nature, okay? You wanna vent, you wanna complain, you wanna go into rage, you wanna feel some sort of emotion. And if you do, well then, of course, that's treated as disobedience, and you may be given certain punishments, whether it is encouraging more self-harm, or whether it is simple things like write up a dissertation on this topic, go read from the index of unforbidden books and write this up, which you can see how that would discourage people to speak up, leading to them just constantly being unhappy, complying, and just simply saying yes to everything. This can fall under the third way of mind control that can be seen through Opus Dei, which is thought control. You are constantly reminded that you are Opus Dei. You're constantly reminded why you joined the organization in the first place. And you are also reminded why you're indoctrinating other members, why you're internalizing them into this group doctrine, making sure that they incorporate the same language system, making sure that they're keeping their mind centered, that everything that isn't Opus Dei related is seen as a waste of time. This is why they have so many prayers throughout the day. When you saw the list through Day of Life, like how many prayers? Could you even count them? And this is why they're encouraged to also state all of those prayers at any single given time. Like whether it is before bedtime, whether it is when they're just walking, they should be saying rosary and other prayers. Because of that, then only having times for classes or further prayers throughout the night, sleep deprivation, all of that going into effect, they have absolutely no free time to think, to use their own mind, to actually make their own decisions, because everything is already designated for them in such a way to limit as much thought process as possible. And Opus Dei definitely did take some pages out of the same book that the Elan School implemented, because spying on other members, other numeraries, is encouraged. Any incident must be reported to the director, and then they're the ones to decide if something is in bad spirit or done with a bad attitude. And members always have the feeling of being watched. And this feeling is established from the recruitment process, because they would pair you up with this quote-unquote buddy who is used during the recruitment process, to help you assimilate. Is that the word? I always say acclimate. We got there. Assimilate. What the fuck? Okay, immigrant life story. And once this person is actually brought in, then the friend of the recruit introduces you to another buddy, and they help convince you, basically sell Opus Dei to you. From that point on, it is encouraged that you report your thoughts in the weekly chat with the spiritual director. And of course, then if you report something bad, they take it as disobedience and they take it against you. Now, as expected, this would lead to rewards and punishments in order to encourage behavior modification. So, if numeraries were successful in recruiting, they were reaching their quota, they would be allowed to invite their friends, these are the internal friends, other numeraries, to ski trips, weekend getaways, even different pilgrimages to Rome. But every reward has to be done in such a way where they're thinking about recruitment, where they're thinking about quota. If they were to go for a dinner, that friend has to be the potential recruit. Also, if they're having any doubts, the punishments can be anything from you writing a dissertation or just labor-intensive duties like cleaning toilets. They basically degrade you for you to be the numerary assistant. Weekly, they would also go for confessions with a priest, and because they cannot say that, of course, they have reached perfection, which would be the goal in Opus Dei, they are by default sinful. And then, of course, the past sins would be used to manipulate and control them, without any feeling that there is any form to reach any forgiveness or absolution. So you might wonder, after having gone through, different mind control techniques, why not leave? And it is exactly because of that, because of the guilt tripping and because of the emotional control that Opus Dei now has over them. So as a default, we know that the members are free to join and to leave as they please. Nobody is holding them. But now, when thinking about the fourth method of mind control that Opus Dei might be applying, which would be emotional control, this can include any attempt to manipulate, narrow the range of a person's feelings, and imposing some form of either guilt or fear or both to keep these people under control. They're financially dependent on Opus Dei. Any jobs that they might have are through them. And also because they have been discouraged now for a significant amount of time to keep in touch with their family and friends, they might be completely ostracized from just any support network. In the testimonials, people who have gotten out of Opus Dei by now say that you are allowed, as again everybody tells you, to have dinner with family friends, but then once you come back, you get a scolding from the director because it took the time from Opus Dei. So eventually, you're either growing discontent and you finally leave, or you are just guilt-tripped into staying because you want to commit, because you have chosen to do this for life. You don't leave because you feel like you have been alienated from your family, because Opus Dei from day one has taught you that it is acceptable to leave parents and loved ones behind. And they just might not understand this way of life. So most parents actually learn about their children joining this kind of commitment and joining the centers sometimes even years later, because it is usually yet again during the university, college years. So they don't even know if the kid has actually moved into one of those centers, or again, if they have chosen during the formation period to still live at the university campus and stuff and just go to these lectures. And internally, this is done through just displaying of any family pictures, any bonds with friends, and also, God forbid, visiting them for dinners or just over the weekend. It is just discouraged by example. So eventually, the bond between the parent and the child is broken. And now, even when thinking about leaving, you're thinking, well, where am I going to go? Not just that, but even if you somehow manage to sustain that relationship, you are in fear that you will be excommunicated by the church. In one of the testimonials, I have heard that this is legitimate. I mean, there are probably more when it comes to this, but they tell you it is like a divorce, right? If you leave Opus Dei, you will be excommunicated by the Catholic Church. And that in turn means that you cannot be saved.
When I joined Opus Dei, I was told you can't call your family and you can't visit them. And we don't make long-distance phone calls and we don't go visit them. So I was like, okay. And so I didn't do that.
When one takes on a commitment, especially if one has a celibate commitment to go anywhere and do anything for the service of God, then they may not be as available to their families as they were in the past.
And let's say, despite of all of this, despite of everything we have been talking about, you find enough strength to leave. And I truly believe that whoever left Opus Dei is an extremely strong person, because they just break you. They just break you, and the longer you stay, well, probably the less prone you are to leaving. The former members, once the numeraries leave, are given just short, vague reasons why they left. Kind of like, when you work for a toxic workplace and they just don't really explain like why the person left. It's like, it's not us, okay? It's not us, it's them. There's absolutely no discussion about the people that have left, and also they're trying to keep them busy in order not to think about things or check things out. And this is yet again why they have to have like 15 quote-unquote friends, trying to get people, trying to recruit them on top of like all of the prayers and following that way of life. Because of the decisions and because of the power that the directors have, they decide if they're going to comment on anything, and the person leaving usually doesn't have any time to say goodbye. There's no address where they can communicate with them, and there's no way to keep in touch with that numerary.
Colleen was a very typical intervention. She was disturbed inside, wanting to have some freedom, but at the same time not wanting to leave the group, not wanting to leave doing God's perfect will in her vocation. You give up your life, you give up any money, you give up everything, absolutely everything. And once you're in, you're constantly reminded you gave everything to God.
By the end of it, you're just stuck in between not wanting to leave the group, but also feeling imprisoned, and your gut is just telling you that something isn't right. So how do people usually break out? Sometimes, yes, it is upon their own will. They decide it's not for them and they just leave, never keep in touch with any numeraries. A lot of times, though, it is because their family members actually care. Here, as I mentioned, there is a huge difference from the troubled teen industry and from just in general Elan school and any of those schools. The parents notice. The parents suddenly start honing in that this child has joined something, that they have joined the organization, that they have completely changed. And in those cases, they hire what are known as cult interventionists. Tammy Nicola would say that people on the inside wouldn't even realize the flip switch, that they have just transformed into robots. And by default, that means that they have disassociated from the true feelings because they can't speak of them, so they just reject everybody who loves them. And this is where we keep hearing about the term called exit counseling and deprogramming, because it is the only thing that works once the person on their own can't make that decision.
The tragedy about Opus Dei is that they transform people into almost like their own robots in some ways, where you become so disassociated from your true feelings and who you truly are that you can shut out the people that nurtured you, that raised you, that love you.
In a crisis of conscience, her mother Diane began to connect with other Catholic families.
I'm just a mom who wanted to spare other families what my family went through. It was life-altering. I wouldn't wish that on my worst enemy.
With Tammy herself, she had a form of intervention. Where she was supposed to graduate, her family realized what was going on, that she is part of Opus Dei now. Her mom actually went out and researched with like other Catholics in the church, realized that, okay, we need to get her out. So during her graduation, I think it was just like before, they basically had all of the friends and the family that she cared about and this counselor at her house, and they sat her down and tried to do as much of an emotional overload, telling her how much they miss her, and eventually that worked. This, understandably so, makes people distance themselves from Opus Dei. Tammy moved in with her sister, and this is when the phase of readjustment begins, where they slowly start learning how to live independently, again, probably catch up on some fucking sleep, sort of assimilate into the real world. I have a feeling assimilate. What is with the assimilate today? Okay, post-production Maya, Google the definition of the damn word. Editing Maya here, you're not the boss of me. When you sit in front of that mic, hello, past Maya, you're not the boss of me. But assimilate. I did. Google. Assimilate. The word, still not what you meant. Acclimate. Acclimate. It's very, very, very easy. Just like talking is today. Very easy. Immigrant little shit. And they are saying that soon they start getting in touch with their actual emotions that have been squashed for however many months or sometimes years they have been in Opus Dei. Even once on the outside, even once, your family accepted you back, you feel some sense of readjustment, you also feel like you're not fully out of the grips of Opus Dei. Dennis Dubrow made a trip to their offices in Rome after he left Opus Dei, and they wanted to speak about one of the director's misbehavior, so they actually wanted to speak somebody in the HQ. However, when he went there, they told him that he has to have a confession before he can even speak to anybody. For him, this was sort of a final straw, because they just saw, finally, Opus Dei for what it was. A delusional organization. The organization that is so obsessed with the vision of holiness that Escriva has set in stone that now they might actually be losing the grip on reality. And even outside, it seems like Opus Dei still controls over who you can talk to and whether or not you can be trusted. If you were to call the vicar, to call any of those bodies where you can report any sort of misconduct, well, if they are buddies with the management team, if they're buddies with the directors, or just if you come across a director and you're like, hey, I want to speak about misbehavior, of course, they might hang up on you. They might, just because of their affiliation with the management team, refuse to talk to you. And because of the limited information that you were exposed to when in Opus Dei, you can only hear about the bad stuff once you're actually out. Both Dennis and Tammy said that since leaving Opus Dei, they read so many complaints on the internet that they just never knew that, this is how other people felt. So you're just stuck in a cycle where nobody believes you, and those that do aren't speaking up because of this behavior that is imprinted on them. That, you're committing some sort of disobedience, that it is guilt. And then again, if you reach out to anybody that might understand, that is within Catholic Church, that is within the HQ of Opus Dei, they don't want to listen to them. It's sinister, but if you think about it, it's cunning, and it is a perfect MO for this organization to continue operating, at least at the level of membership that is the numeraries. But out of all of the controversies, all of the reasons, subtle or not, for secrecy that Opus Dei had implemented, there is the one to tie it all. And even though we don't have a day in a life that is recent, this controversy brings us where Opus Dei is today. And the controversy is about misogyny and treatment of women. Opus Dei made it to the news recently with the article in November 2021 titled "More than 40 women have filed a complaint against Opus Dei to the Vatican for alleged labor exploitation and abuse of power and of consciousness." The story follows now 56-year-old Lucia Jimenez, who joined the conservative Catholic group in Paraguay, and she was only 14 years old. She was promised an education, but instead, yet again making me believe that she was probably from a poorer background, she was trained in cooking, cleaning, and other household chores. This meant that for 18 years, she would be washing clothes, doing the bathroom chores, attending groups' needs about 12 hours each day. Her only breaks were to pray and to eat. And despite that labor, she said that she never saw any money because all of it would go to the group. So finally, in 2021, she and 41 other women filed a complaint against Opus Dei to the Vatican. Their complaints surrounded the violations of basic human rights, that they were allowed no breaks, and there was no registration in the social security system either. So basically, once they're out, it counts as if they have never worked a day of their life. Also, they claim that Opus Dei priests and other members exercised coercion of conscience on the women in order to pressure them to serve and in order to put fear into them that, everything that they're not doing and anything they're not complying with can be seen as defying the will of God. The 42 women that complained are demanding some financial reparations from Opus Dei and also for them to acknowledge and apologize for the abuse and for them to investigate this internally in order to punish the people responsible. However, according to the director of the press office for Opus Dei, Josefina Madariaga, there is no such notification from Vatican about the existence of one such complaint. She further said that if there is one such traumatic experience, or if they have been left wounded, they honestly want to listen to them. They want to understand what happened, and from there correct what has to be corrected. She added, probably told by her own directors to save the company's ass, that all of the people currently working on site are paid, adding that some 80 women currently work for Opus Dei in Argentina, where this was reported. She said in the 60s, 70s, 80s, even 90s, society as a whole dealt with these issues in a more informal or family way. But Opus Dei has made the necessary changes and modifications to accompany the law in force today, which I read as we were doing some illegal shit. But now 2021, when this complaint came in, we're good. We are good. So, slap on the face, that is what this is. I have checked literally before recording this. I haven't seen an update on this, that anybody actually listened to these women, that any reparations have been made. What I can tell you, where else to look for sources and different testimonials if you are interested in this topic beyond this 3-hour long video by now, is to check the Opus Dei Awareness Network. That is where I found Tammy's story, that is where I found Denise's story. And this is one of the most vocal opponents out there of Opus Dei.
In 1991, she created ODAN, the Opus Dei Awareness Network. Her message of education and support has been amplified by the internet, providing a forum for thousands.
We don't have millions of dollars. We're just a grassroots organization. And all the people who have been hurt by Opus Dei, the people that we thought we were a family of one back in the 1980s, the web is a tool for the truth. Finally, we have this thing that connects us.
It has resources, it has the ways to communicate with them, to write your own letter, for your testimonial to be shared, it has other people's testimonials. It is a really great source, and it has them in Spanish as well. I think maybe even other languages wherever Opus Dei is present, but Spanish for sure. So if you want, you can check that one out. But to wrap this topic up, could it be that the life in Opus Dei on all levels has completely changed? Because yes, life is a constant change. Maybe there were processes in 60s and 70s that are completely different now. It could be, in which case it also doesn't deny all of the stories and the testimonials by the people I've spoken about, by so many that are online, and it doesn't do it with the people that are complaining in 2021, because they should be investigated and taken seriously so that it doesn't repeat itself. Or it could be that there is still a dark side to Opus Dei, and that because of that veil of secrecy, that enforcement of privacy, we will never truly know what is really going on behind the closed doors. You let me know which version you believe in more. And as I mentioned over and over again, what I have been talking about still applies to a small percentage. It applies to the celibate members, the numeraries. I haven't really read testimonies of like people who are, living outside, who are exposed to day-to-day life, and any sort of severe testimonies from them, any like complaints. There probably are online. Maybe I just wasn't looking hard enough, because I wanted to talk about the secret world. I wanted to talk about the darkest side, the most morbid things that Opus Dei can expose their members to. But that is all I have on this story. You know, when other people say that, that's like a half an hour video. It's not here. And now for the next one, I'm actually reading a book. I'm waiting for it right now, so I'm gonna try to make you wait for this video for a few more days for my book to arrive. And then that one is at least gonna be a two-parter. It is such a niche book, it is such a niche case, but I follow this person on Twitter, I follow the writer in the book, and he follows me back. So I was like, he follows like 10,000 people, it's not special. It is special, okay? I will give them a shout out, and the case is, whoa, it's insane. It is niche, it is not so. So if you don't want to miss out on that, make sure that bell is on, that you have subscribed, that you have liked, that you're here with me, because that case is sort of mysterious. It's mysterious, it's kind of solved, called in what, so I need your Sherlock Holmes caps on. I like how excited I get just about the next deep dive. Let's crack it. In the meantime, you let me know what you think about Opus Dei. There is that one person. Police is coming for me, guys. There is that one person that's going to write up a comment. Don't laugh when telling a serious story. It is inappropriate. Did I laugh in the inappropriate part? Did I laugh? No. I was freaking trembling because this story was morbid as shit. Like the level of uncomfortability I felt when speaking about self-mortification. Did I laugh at that? No. Good. I'm glad we had that sorted. Okay, somebody needs her hot chocolate from KFC if it's still open. There is a very niche order in KFC. Yes, they look at me weirdly. And I will not be stopped. Okay. Bye, guys. Bye.